Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University, and welcome to Art Week number 4 in our course Integrating the Arts. Join me this week for this video when we're going to consider centers and also health education, along with a whole lot more. In this video, let's begin by considering centers and components of centers. Then let's look at the importance of health education, and let's identify themes that could support learning centers such as health, safety, and nutrition. Let's consider how children develop physically, and let's look at how we can incorporate physical education and art into our classroom through centers. And finally, let's consider some thoughts on assessment of music and the arts. Let's begin by looking at centers. A learning center is a self-contained part of the classroom, some activity in which students can engage in independent and self-directed learning activities. And this frees the teacher up to walk around and assist students as they go through various centers, which typically a teacher will provide as simultaneous activity. Students can participate in maybe 3 centers during that class period. There are 3 main types of centers. There's an enrichment center, and this type allows students to enhance their understanding of the content after the material has been presented. So it's an enhancement. The second type is a skill center, and in this type of center, we reinforce material that has already been learned. A third type of center is the interest or exploratory center, and this type of center allows students to further explore a topic of interest. Typically, teachers provide these types of centers, maybe spelling to support language arts, or a numbers center to support math, a storytelling center, a center dealing with some topic in science such as water, and also art and music centers. Let's consider the typical components of centers. A teacher starts off with a good title, something interesting that both identifies the center as separate from the other classroom activities, but also draws the learner in to interest them and motivate them. A second component is instructions. Post a clear and thorough set of instructions in each center. Plan some time to talk about these directions, these instructions and routines with students as part of an introductory lesson, so they're not blindsided when they walk in. They'll know what to expect, and they'll know to look for those instructions and to follow them. 2 other practical considerations when you're planning centers. One is the location of the centers. So start by considering the physical placement and the arrangement of centers in your room, because you have to allow so students can move to the centers and among the centers, and they have enough room to work within the center itself. The teacher needs to be able to see all the students and view all of the centers at the same time as the teacher walks around the room. So think about traffic flow. Keep in mind safety, where are the exits so the student can leave the room as needed, and consider children with disabilities. A second other practical consideration is participation in the centers. How are you going to have students travel through these centers? Are you going to have the whole group at one time? Are you going to break the class into groups? Are you going to have a small group at a time in each center? Are you going to have partners go through the centers? So consider these practical considerations before you plan to implement the centers in your classroom, and this will add to positive classroom management and ensure that students know what they're doing so that they'll be very productive in the centers and make best use of their time. Now let's turn our focus to 3 different areas that you could include in centers: health, safety, and nutrition. Health education draws from several different areas, from biological, environmental, psychological, physical, and also medical science. And its purpose is to proactively promote good health and practices. It's also meant to prevent disease, to prevent disability, and premature death. Why is health education so important? It's important for us to teach positive health activities and routines and values to our young students, because if we teach them now, these routines will become something that they will use throughout the rest of their lives. It's important because health education will improve the health status of people, of families, and of communities, and larger, of states and our whole nation. In other words, it enhances the quality of life for not just the individual, but for all people. You can reduce premature death by focusing on prevention of disease and other negative situations. Health education reduces the costs, and that's both the monetary cost and the human cost that both individuals and employers deal with, and also families. Think about insurance companies, medical facilities, the whole community, and a state, and even the nation. The cost to all of these entities, because we spend on medical treatment. If we don't prevent it, then we end up spending to try to address it and maybe even fix it, hopefully, later on in life. So health education is vital for us to teach to our young students. It has been suggested from research that approximately only 18% of American adults follow all 3 of the most important cardiovascular disease prevention measures. And those are not smoking, maintaining a healthy weight, and also exercising regularly. Only 18% of the adult population does all 3. It's also been suggested through research that approximately 2/3 of the United States adult population is now overweight or obese. And that has a direct monetary cost associated with it as well. The estimated annual direct medical spending from people who are overweight and obese is approximately $92 billion. So $92 billion a year spent to address issues directly related to obesity. Further, research has suggested that the number of overweight children between the ages of 6 and 11 has tripled over the past 3 decades. Obesity is a major contributor to all kinds of health issues, such as heart disease, even arthritis, some types of cancer, and different types of disease. Annual deaths that are associated with being overweight in this country are estimated to be between 100 and 300,000 people every year. So if you think about it, it is much easier and it costs a whole lot less to keep our children healthy rather than for them to have a problem and then we try to fix these preventable health problems later on in their lives. Plus, it greatly will increase the quality of their life. What type of health and safety topics would work well for use in a center? For our youngest children, parts of the body, their location, and also what they do. For example, where is your wrist? What does it do for us? If you had no nose, what would you miss doing? what can your ears do to help you? So parts of the body are very good to use in the center for our youngest children. And then we can start looking at, on the broader scale, what are some of the body systems? For example, the skeletal system, our circulatory system, and all of our muscles. Personal hygiene is a very, very important topic. We want to talk about bathing, about brushing your teeth, how to do it well, how to be effective with it, and why it's so important. And washing our hands, something that since the pandemic has hit in 2020, people are much, much more aware of cleanliness and washing hands. Brushing teeth is so important. A lot of research is suggesting in the last several years that the teeth have a lot to do with the overall health of the body. Now, certainly it's easy to see that if you do not take care of your teeth, that you'll have trouble digesting food and it can affect your diet. But some studies have linked good habits with cleaning of your teeth and taking care of your gums and so on to heart disease. So that's a very important topic for our young learners to understand. We have to talk about community helpers. For example, doctors, nurses, firefighters, and paramedics. Now, one quick note. Notice that I mentioned firefighters and not firemen, because it's very possible to find men and women, or in case of our children, we would say boys and girls, being doctors or nurses or fire personnel or paramedics. So make sure you're careful with gender, because you don't want to deter someone from maybe looking to enter one of these fields. Another important part of this is so that people are not afraid of these community helpers, because these people all work to help us. And sometimes we hear different things in news media and children may be afraid of them. And just think for a moment, if a child had a firefighter come to their house trying to rescue them because there was an emergency situation inside that house, you would not want them to be afraid of them dressed in their gear and run away and hide, because it could mean their life. So teach as community helpers. Another safe practice is using sunscreen. Now, a lot of people are aware in today's day that the sun can be very damaging to the skin. Too much sun exposure can lead to all kinds of health problems and different types of cancer, and especially skin cancer, which can be a very devastating type of cancer, because that cancer can spread throughout the body. When you think of it, our entire body is covered with skin. So using sunscreen is a very important health and safety topic. It's important for our young learners to understand how to handle emergency situations. You have to stay calm, and you have to know how to acquire the help that you need. 911 is almost a universal number, phone number, to summon the help that you could need. And we've all seen in the news media where at times some very young people, like 5, 6 years old, knew to dial 911, and it maybe saved someone's life in their family and in their household. So that's an important topic. Bike safety, wearing a helmet, being cautious when you're riding on the roads. Now, I'm a biker, so I'm always cautious of these things. You're participating on or near a road where a lot of cars are traveling and buses and trucks, and there's a lot of danger. So that's an important topic. Smoking is one of my platforms. Smoking causes a lot of harm in the body and shortens life, and it also lessens the quality of life tremendously. So very important topic. And also drug use. Now, in today's day and age, we have to watch not just street drugs, things that are illegal, but we have to watch uh, so that even if a doctor prescribes certain drugs that they may prescribe legally, um, if you're not careful, you can become addicted to. So drug use is an important topic as well. And don't think too casually about vaping. Don't feel a sense of false security because while long-term studies are needed, because it's still a newer type of activity to do, to link vaping and cancer, a number of studies in the meantime are linking vaping to dangerous health conditions. According to the CDC, and the latest material that I could find in terms of statistics from them is the end of February 2020, where 2,800 hospitalizations, almost 3,000 hospitalizations or deaths have resulted directly from vaping. Now, confirmed deaths, and the CDC only has the confirmation from 29 different states, so there's probably a lot more out there. 68 confirmed deaths in these 29 states directly from vaping. And think about it. While maybe cigarettes might not appeal to younger children, but when you look at the vaping products, they include all kinds of interesting flavors, such as bubble gum and cherry and different types of flavors that would appeal to young children. And they might, again, get that false sense of security that, well, this isn't smoking, so it's okay. It's a whole lot more safe. But really, it's not. Similar to smoking cigarettes, vaping can cause shortness of breath, can cause problems in the chest and with the heart, like chest pain, fatigue, without any sign of infection. People who vape typically have an increased respiratory illness and a higher risk of infection in their lungs. It can also result in something that's called popcorn lung, where the lungs are physically changed over time. And don't forget about nicotine, which is a controlled substance. It's a drug. The effects of nicotine include an increase in heart attacks, stroke, unexpected, known as sudden cardiac death, high blood pressure, and cholesterol problems. Some people even experience seizures directly from vaping, which you normally don't from smoking a cigarette. And of course, the long-term problem here could be addiction to nicotine, and then it's hard to shake that habit over time. So if our students start into these types of habits, unfortunately, it's a downward spiral that continues to grow, and it's very difficult to kick after. So vaping and smoking are very important health and safety topics, and they would fit in very well in a center. Another very important topic for early childhood learners is nutrition. And I'm going to refer to material that's supplied by our federal government in the United States, especially that supplied on a website called choosemyplate.gov. Let's take a better look at some of their guidelines and what they mean for our children. I like how choosemyplate.gov illustrates through metaphor the 5 food groups that are the building blocks for a good, solid, sound, healthy diet. And they do that by using a familiar image, which is a place setting for a meal. So what we want to impress on our children is, before you eat, think about what is going on your plate or into your bowl or into your glass. And Choose My Plate considers fruits and vegetables, grains, proteins, and also dairy. Let's take a look at some of the particulars. The first food group that they present is fruit. So by fruit, we're talking about fruit juice or any types of fruits, whether they're fresh or canned or frozen in any form. We're just referring to fruit in all those forms. Now first, take a look at the recommended daily amounts. Depending on the age of the student, 1 cup or 1.5 cup per day. So fruit is an important part of our diet. Now let's talk about some of the dangers here. If we just eat regular fruit, like fresh fruit, our students are in much better shape in terms of their diet. Consider different fruit juices. Most fruit juices are not 100% fruit juice. Instead, there's a lot of sugar in them, or they're made up of a sugar syrup, and also a small percentage of the fruit juice. Beware of those things. Also, beware of different canned products as well. And doesn't necessarily have to be in a can, but in another type of container. So something, in other words, that is not fresh fruit. Beware of what kind of syrup are they put into. Is it natural? Is it just water? Again, most products want to sugar us up because for many people that it tastes better to them. And many people are addicted to carbohydrates and are looking for that sugar. Those should be avoided. Fresh fruit is always the best. And again, beware of fruit juices. If they contain 100% fruit juice, that's good. The second very important food group is vegetables. So here we're talking about any vegetable, or again, if there's a vegetable juice that does contain 100% vegetable juice, would be considered a member of the vegetable group. So in any form, whether vegetables are raw or they're cooked, you can buy them fresh, frozen, in any form, they're still very good for the body. So notice the recommended amounts for our children, either 1 cup or 1.5 cups per day. Now, as children grow older, then they can start to look at some of the finer points, such as depending the form of the vegetable and how you prepare it, you could actually help to lessen some of the healthful benefits, like the vitamins that are contained in the vegetables. But again, that's for older children. So right now, we would let our children know any vegetable is excellent for the body. The third food group that's presented on this website are grains. And grains are any kind of food made from anything like wheat or rice or oats, cornmeal, barley. And some examples of these products are bread and pastas, breakfast cereals, tortillas, and grits. Notice the recommended amounts, about 3 ounces to 5 ounces, depending on the age of our student. Now, in today's world, we're aware that there's a great increase. There's more awareness, but there's also an increase in different allergies, gluten allergies. So be aware of that as you teach this particular area of food. Some students do have to be cautious on the types of grains that they consume. The fourth food group, proteins, are very important for a healthy body. So by protein, we're referring to any products made from meat, poultry, seafood, beans, peas, eggs, soy products, nuts, and seeds. Realize that sometimes beans and peas are also considered a vegetable. So notice the recommended amounts here for consumption, depending on children's age, from 2 ounces to 4 ounces per day. The fifth and final formal food group is dairy. And by dairy, as you're probably aware, we're talking about anything dealing with milk. Now, ideally, for most diets, dairy group choices should involve fat-free or low-fat. But we also have a lot of products available today, such as calcium-fortified soy milk, different soy beverages, and they're considered part of the dairy group. Now we find almond milk and many other types of milk that are available. Why is dairy so important for the body? Well, we know that that helps to build and fortify bones, which includes teeth. So a healthy diet should definitely include dairy products. Notice the recommended amounts for our children depending on their age, between 2 and 2.5 cups per day. One more type of food that is listed but is not considered an actual food group is oils. Now, oils are important for the body because they provide essential nutrients. So the USDA does talk about oils and their importance in our diet. Now, if you're wondering, an oil is actually a fat that becomes liquid at room temperature. Oils come naturally from many different plants and also from fish. And fish oil is an important part of a person's diet, especially as they grow older. Now, in terms of the recommended amounts, notice that there are no amounts listed by myplate.gov. And the reason why that is so is because so many Americans consume so much oil in foods like nuts and fish, and just the use of cooking oil for frying different foods and for other preparations, as well as salad dressings. You don't have to really focus on this one and say, make sure you're getting enough oil, because most people are getting more than enough oil without even focusing on that at all. In summary, we find that ChooseMyPlate.gov recommends a nice variety and a good balance and mix of fruits, vegetables, grains, protein foods, and dairy, with an understanding that we also need oils, but we'll probably get them just naturally through foods that we regularly consume. Another quick point to make that I think is very important, we find that children, especially children who are in a family where people are looking at doing a weight loss diet plans. There are so many different diet plans available today, and many of them are fads, and while some are good for the body, some are dangerous for the body. We have to make sure that we don't allow our young children to be subjected to the same thinking that's applied to the adult community. For our young children to go on the keto diet or whatever the latest fad is would not be a good idea. That's why we want to make sure that we reinforce this whole plan, and as I think is very well illustrated at this website from our government, ChooseMyPlate.gov. So again, this would be a wonderful topic for use in a center. Another important topic related to health is how our children develop physically. Let's turn our focus on this. As we consider physical development of our early childhood learners, realize that this will include gross and fine motor skills. There will be differing abilities at different ages. Remember that this is a very important area to learning, as well as every other area of development. Physical education is so important because it supports academic achievement. It supports overall health and health moving forward in life as our children grow older. It supports the building of self-esteem. It helps us deal with stress, and it supports positive social development. Children are toddlers. They're crawling, and by doing so, they're learning to get around and explore the world around them. When they become 3 years old, now their physical activities can be more sustained and much more focused. Gross motor activities tend to be much more pleasurable to them now. Now they're learning to run. They like to dance. They like to move. They like to throw something. They like to catch. Now think about their catching for a moment. When we think of catching, we're thinking about, oh, there's a baseball coming my way, I'll grab it like this. But for the 3-year-old, they're not sure with how to coordinate that yet. So typically their arms go out wide, wider than I'm going to show in this video. And there's a ball coming toward them. They go way out and grasp it like that. Even if it's a little tiny ball, they're going way out and going to grasp it. So realize that while they like throwing and catching, rolling a ball to them would probably be the most effective at this age. They also start to like quiet play much more than when they were younger. So they're ready to play with puppets and do some painting and also do puzzles. At age 4, we see huge differences and great advancements in physical capabilities of the children. Gross motor and fine motor skills are greatly increased. For example, in the gross motor area, students are now able to take steps by alternating their feet rather than taking one step at a time and then another step at a time. They can now use all of the outdoor play equipment. In terms of fine motor skills, they're able to do things such as wash their hands. They can now start to manipulate buttons and zippers and Velcro. And they're able to, with much more accuracy, cut lines with scissors. And now they're ready to start tying their own shoes. By age 5, we see more huge developments in terms of physical capabilities. Now the children can jump rope. They can ride a bike. Now maybe at this point with training wheels still on, but they can start balancing and doing that. They can stand on their tiptoes. They have greater control over things they can do with their hands and manipulate, such as they can really control a paintbrush very well. They could weave a ribbon, and their writing of both numbers and letters improves with much greater accuracy. Now let's focus on how we can incorporate both physical education and art into our classes. It is important to incorporate movement and activity in classes. In our last class meeting, we discussed how nutrition and in this case, not the best nutrition, and lack of exercise, lack of movement leads to obesity and other childhood problems that can travel with children into adulthood. So how can we incorporate movement into daily classes? Think about the transitions between different activities when you have students moving from one place to another. Could you transition by having them tiptoe from one place to another? Could you have them hop? Could you make them walk like a certain animal, walk like an elephant does, or walk like a lion would? You could have them gallop like a horse, or skip, or have them march. If you incorporate movement into transitions, not only will this stimulate activity and motivate students to be active, but also it will incorporate fun into the process and show students how enjoyable it is to participate in movement like this. Let's think creatively. When you're incorporating movement into the classroom, let's say that you were teaching a lesson maybe about a story that involved a dog. Well, instead of having the children just walk from one activity to another or transition from one station to another, maybe you could have paw prints. You could put them down on the ground, and maybe you could have students hop from one paw print to another, or they could skip, or they could jump. Notice how this will support the content that you're teaching, but also it's going to incorporate movement into that lesson. At times, you could incorporate movement into classes just as a break, just a break activity, and have students get up and dance or sway or move in some way, or have a parade and students can march around as they listen to music. And possibly they could play some instruments like drums and tambourines and things of this nature and rhythm sticks and march with this. Again, it'll be fun, it'll be a break for the children, and also it'll be incorporating movement into the class. Let's say that you are teaching a lesson about shapes. You could have the students create a shape collage. You could use old magazines, old greeting cards, catalogs, different advertisements, anything printed, and they could look for different shapes. And this activity will help further develop and refine their fine motor skills. And then you can incorporate some movement in this lesson as well. After creating the shape collage, you could take a shape walk with the students. Shapes are everywhere. We can see them inside the classroom, we could see them in the school, we can see them outside as well. For example, here you can see rectangles and squares and circles. They're everywhere. So while children are practicing these skills in identifying these shapes, in addition, they're incorporating movement into their day. Let's enrich this activity even further. Let's take our students on a shape hunt. Let's have them locate different geometric shapes in different pieces of artwork. As you can see in this graphic of a locomotive, we can see circles, we can see triangles, we can see squares and rectangles. Now let's apply this to a work of fine art. So let's try to foster their sense of creativity and their critical thinking and visual skills, and see if they can transfer from what we just looked at in that locomotive, which was very obvious, to a finer work of art. How many shapes can you locate in this painting? There's quite a few here. If we want to take this just a little bit further and give students further practice with shapes, we can utilize foam shapes or blocks. And with them, we could have building activities, we can have counting activities, and of course, practicing identifying shapes all along the way. Here's a creative and a fun activity. Can our students create a shape by using their arms, their legs, and their whole body? As they do this, we're going to be fostering their creativity and their thinking out of the box, so to speak, and we'll also be focusing on gross muscle development. We can help our students identify shapes in different fine artworks and realize that many times artists, even very skilled artists, will start by drawing some basic shapes, and that helps them identify where the different characters or the different elements of a painting or a sketch will exist, and then they fill in details later. For example, when we focus on this painting from Degas of these ballet dancers, notice how we could mimic what the artist saw by drawing it and kind of recreating it with different shapes. If students can see those shapes, then as an art activity, we can then duplicate that and do a drawing or a sculpture of it. But again, at the very least, we can identify different shapes and reassemble them to mimic what the artist has drawn. One final activity at this time, we could use stickers or we could use stamp pads to create patterns. So we can make patterns of circles, squares, triangles, and so on. And then we could associate each of those patterns, each of those shapes, with some type of activity. So for example, if we're listening to music, we could say that when you encounter a circle in the pattern, then we want you to sway, or we want you to do something with your arms, or some type of dance movement. And then we can sequence those. So we could create a sequence card, and we could ask students now to do several different activities following the sequence that's suggested by that pattern of shapes. So here we've looked at a whole number of different activities that could support a whole unit in identifying and working with shapes. And we've also incorporated the arts. We incorporated fine art and drawing and also music and even movement. For our final topic in this week's video, let's say a few words about assessment of music and the arts. You already know that assessment is the process of gathering information about students in order to make decisions about their education. And assessment data provides teachers with clues about what to teach, what to reinforce, and how to help students to understand content better. Now, how about when working with music and the arts, how do you assess this? Because each child has unique talents and interests and knowledge and skills, but each of them are going to progress over time. So assessment in music and the arts involves charting the progress and documenting it by observing, collecting, and reviewing the children's work over time. As we assess our students in these two areas, the physical products that they create can become part of a portfolio, and these examples can show how their thinking and how their abilities have changed over time. So having said that, assessment in music and the arts has to involve observing children regularly and collecting samples of their work. In assessing music and the arts, we can create observational records of children. We can hold interviews and mark down notes about those interviews. We can keep a journal. We can, as we've mentioned, look at and collect some artifacts, some physical products that they have created. We can do narrative descriptions. We can include audio and video in our documentation. This type of assessment is known as performance assessment, in which teachers observe and they take brief notes, both on student discussions and interactions. Teachers take a look at the students' work, the physical products of what they're doing and how they're doing it. And they use this to determine and make comments on their strengths and their weaknesses, and it helps teachers keep track of their progress over time. And this can take the form of a portfolio, observational records, or even anecdotal notes. Another type of assessment that teachers can rely on is self-assessment. In other words, we can ask our children to reflect on their own progress. So while children are creating different art products in our class, and we're walking around and observing and assisting them, we can ask questions like what do you do very well? Or what are your strengths? What are your interests? What skills are you good at? Where can you improve? What is one thing that you really want to work on? And teachers who involve self-assessment from their children find very quickly on that children are very honest and very candid about in their responses about their abilities. Another tool that can assist teachers when they're assessing music and the arts in their classroom is to use a rubric. And through a rubric, the teacher can share a clear understanding of the performance expectations so that the students can understand what is the teacher looking for and what constitutes quality work. And typically, we find that students' motivation and objectivity are enhanced as they understand these aspects of that assignment. One of my favorite places to create a rubric, and you're probably aware of it, is called Rubistar, and that's available at ws.forteachers.org. Here is a screenshot of some criteria that are suggested by Rubistar when you're working with artwork. How can a teacher who is maybe not feeling as comfortable judging and evaluating artwork from his or her students, how can they get some help? Well, this rubric tool, Rubistar, can certainly get you started in the right direction. As you are attempting to evaluate students' artwork, keep in mind that assessment data helps teachers determine how instruction can best meet the needs of both individual students as well as the overall class. So not all assignments have to be graded. You could have some assignments non-graded. Maybe you want to focus on assessing their strengths and their weaknesses. Maybe you want to focus on determining what changes to make to instruction based on evaluation of the assessment data. And the final thought regarding evaluation: families are going to want to know how their child is doing, and family members will really appreciate specific examples, artifacts of their students' progress. So if you can show examples from their child over time, that will enable parents to personally be able to assess the growth and the progress of their child. To support this communication with family, you can certainly, as we mentioned, show the artifacts to them. Show them the pieces of artwork. Let them see how the children have grown. You can certainly share grades with them, and also any anecdotal notes or comments, a summary of their progress and performance from your observations. Just a heads up that to allow you to practice these types of observational skills and start to realize how you can assess and evaluate children's work with art and music, we're going to have an activity, an assignment later in the semester in which you will get to create an observational record. And we're going to ask you to observe a child from pre-K to 4 in any setting where you can find a child who's going to be working with music and or art. I'll share more information about the particulars of this assignment when we're back in person class. As a quick review, we began this video by looking at learning centers. We took a look at the components of centers, and then we started identifying themes that could be very supportive for use in learning centers. We looked at the importance of health education. Then we looked at health, safety, and nutrition topics. Then we looked at how children develop physically at different ages. Then we considered how to incorporate physical education and art into our daily classes. And finally, we tried to demystify how teachers could assess students' involvement in music and the arts. At our next in-person class, we're going to highlight and review and discuss some of the content presented in this video. And then let's spend our time doing some hands-on art activities. We spoke a lot about shapes. So let's create a shape collage inspired by the artwork of a number of famous artists. And finally, let's create a work in the style of pointillism, which is inspired by the paintings of Georges Seurat. Have a great week, and see you at our next class.